Well, you got to meet my oldest son. We were very pleased with him. And he doesn't remember any of the rules. But I think that actually comes back to the fact that those rules were couched in a conversation. And so he knew why we were doing what we were doing, and he understood intentionality. We talked a lot about not pursuing a girl until you had an end in mind. Marriage is the purpose of dating is it's not like the first time you date that you're going to get married or something like that. You don't want to put that kind of weight on it. But the purpose of dating is marriage. And so we had talked about, you have to have a good reason to start dating. And so be thinking about, when am I going to be ready to get married? And so when he looked at himself and where he was, he had a part-time job, he was in school, he was building a house. He said, I think I'm getting kind of in a place where I could start thinking about marriage. And then he came and talked to us about that. And, what do you think? And I said, well, yeah, I think you've got some good points. It looks like you maybe are in a good place. Who are you thinking about girl-wise? So, well, if I had to think about, because he had been restraining himself a lot in terms of even considering, and that's his first thought was his wife. So, yeah. But that's another discussion for another time, unfortunately. Okay, so let's go on to our next session. We're continuing to talk about discipleship practices. And the first consideration that you always want to come back to is keeping your eye on the goal, faithfulness in your child. And so here's another practice I want you to think about, because this is going to be the bedrock or the context for all of your interactions and decisions as your child grows. And this has to do with the fact that you need to think about handing over and transferring responsibility. Because that's really what growing a human being is. They start off as a child, and they're dependent on you in everything, and they do whatever you do, and then you're going to somehow transition to an adult who's autonomous from you. They have a relationship to you, we'll talk about that, but they're their own adult, their own person, and they're making all their own decisions. You're not in charge of their decisions at all. So if you start off with this, beginning stage, and you have all the authority and all the responsibility, and everything that happens with them is by your decision, as in a baby, you carry them around, you feed them, you burp them, you do everything for them. They don't do anything unless you decide they do it. Then you're going to, if you start with that and you don't think about where you're going, the fact that one day this child is going to be an adult and autonomous, making their own decisions. If you don't realize you're going somewhere, you may try and just keep this level of responsibility over your child for the whole time until you suddenly have the break at the end. It's like, oh, wait a second, you're supposed to be an adult. There's a couple problems with doing that. The first one is your child usually won't let you, because they're growing and they know they're supposed to be growing as an adult. They're built to start taking on autonomy and responsibility and being able to do their own things, their own desires, their own goals in their life. They start to grow, especially in the teenage years. That starts to flower in children. And so if you decide that you're just going to be the same parent in their teenage years as you were when they were a toddler, you're going to run into trouble, because they're going to fight back against you. And they're going to fight back against you rightfully, because that's not what they're supposed to be as a toddler. They're supposed to be, and they know they're supposed to be something growing. They're going somewhere, okay? So they're adults. And I mentioned this before, and I think this is a good way to think about it. There's, in some senses, there are no teenagers. You've got children and you have adults, and you've got somewhere along the path. So you've got a young adult. You've got a growing adult. You've got an eventual autonomous adult. But there's a path and a gradation, and you need to be planning and thinking about where along the path we are and how are we going to change what we're doing. Because you can't just stay static when you're grazing a child who's not static. They are growing. So transferring responsibility. You start off, you have a child, you act as a parent, and God's given you authority. So sometimes our problem when we get to teenagerhood is that we haven't really understood our authority at all. That can be also a problem. So we don't know how to exercise authority, and we didn't really maybe learn it even when they were children. We were just managing the needs, but we weren't taking on the authority that we have. I did not understand authority as a young parent. I actually, maybe I'm not great at it now, but it was actually as my children grew and I had to start exercising authority in a different realms that I really started to understand authority better. When there were times in which my children were rebelling against authority, they were being disrespectful, and I didn't even really recognize it. So I wasn't fighting back against it. I was just kind of letting it happen. My wife would recognize it. And so she would point that out, and I was like, oh, I need to think about that. I didn't have this understanding of having authority and exercising it rightly and expecting them to respect authority. And you really should expect respect of authority starting when they're young. Toddlers are going to push back against authority. And that's the time, not when they're teenagers, when they're toddlers, that's the time when you establish authority and establish respect for authority. And then you continue to teach the child as they grow to respect authority, because when they become teenagers and when they become young adults, they're going to have to respect authority even as they are stepping out from underneath it. And learning to do that is difficult, and that takes a lot of conversation, and the conversations Aiden's talking about were of those caliber, talking about what it means to respect our authority, to walk under our authority, but also to start taking on responsibility on yourself. So that's the pattern I want you to be thinking about, and what you always need to come back to. And my wife and I it's not like we have a constant conversation. It's almost like we forget to talk about it, and then all of a sudden we realized our children have changed and we need to talk about it again. So we're coming back to this conversation. We come back to it more readily now because we realize the conversation's there. And earlier on, I don't think we were as aware. So this thinking about transferring authority and responsibility needs to be something that you're always engaged in. It's going to look different when they're younger. A lot of times, there's not much handing over responsibility. But the way you handle little transfers earlier is going to lead the way it lands later. So Aiden's talking about how these discussions we had and the way he came to us when he was interested in marriage and when he was going to pursue his wife and when he talked to us ahead of time because he wanted our wisdom. But we had established that kind of relationship by handing over things small early. He also said they had given me the understanding that they were going to give me advice, but it wasn't because I had to do it. That was something we started with early. Not by saying, okay, you're on your own, but we would take little things that we would hand to him, and we would give him an opportunity to make decisions and then live with those decisions. And we wouldn't always completely protect him from those or fix those for him. So we would give him, here's an example we do with all of our children. We give them money. We don't give them very much money. Their grandparents will give them birthday money, and we will pay them for different things. But we give them an opportunity to have access to some of their money. And when we give them access to some of their money, we don't put a lot of controls on that. We will encourage them when they talk about buying something. We'll talk to them about, advantages, disadvantages, how much it costs. Is there anything else you want to be saving for? But if they want to buy it, we generally will let them buy it. Now, maybe not when they're 5 or 6, and then we go to the store and they're supposed to buy a gift for their older brother and they want to buy a bunch of candy for themselves. We'll tell them no. But when they get to be older, we won't tell them no very often. And unless it's something immoral or something they shouldn't buy or something we're not going to let them use, we generally will let them use their spending money however they like. But then they also sometimes will run out of spending money and they don't have any. And the things they've spent it on won't be maybe what they'd hoped they'd been. So that's just there's not much cost to that. We're not losing much for having them spend their spending money. But if we had grabbed onto and said, no, you only buy it, or we had manipulated them, you only buy it if we say it's worth buying, and if we'll either say no, or sometimes parents can make them feel so bad about making a decision different than we did that they'll manipulate them emotionally into following you. And that's not a good place to be, because I've seen adult children who are still trying to work themselves out of that emotional manipulation by their parents to do what parents think is right rather than what they think is right or what they want to do. So you don't want to do that. You want to find a way to articulate to them that this is yours to make a decision with. We are going to tell you to some degree what we think, but we really are going to let you do this. And if we talk later about the consequences, you don't have any money, we're not going to be, oh, see, I told you if you'd just listened to me. It just needs to be done carefully. Respect them. You can talk to them about, remember, you did spend all your money on this, and that was one of the reasons I want you to be careful. But you know what? Let's think about it now. You don't have it now. That's what the decisions you made. That's God's providence. It may make you, maybe you want to think about the way you do things in the future. Okay, but let's not be broken apart because we did the wrong thing either. And so don't let your standing of, I knew what you should have done, you didn't do it. Don't let that color the way you now lead them out through the fact that they made a bad decision. You're leading them there too, toward how you have, when you've made bad decisions as an adult, you've had to keep going. So now teach them how to keep going and how to make good decisions in the future. And so those are the sorts of things that you want to be thinking about as you're transferring responsibility. And so what you always need to be thinking about from when they're young, and then as they grow, be looking for opportunities to transfer responsibility. So it could be money. It can be things they can do. It could be work around the house. It could be cooking. And I'm not talking about cooking a meal for everybody, but when somebody wants to help in the kitchen, or if somebody wants to learn to make an egg for themselves, even if they're not going to do a good job at it, you help them learn. You encourage them in that. You hand over what you can, and then you give them opportunities to use what you have handed over to them. As they get older, you can hand over, and especially sometimes situations in your family will push this, like when my wife and I realized there was no way we were keeping up with our laundry. It was impossible. And so part of our handling our laundry was to hand over responsibility of your individual laundry to you, to the older children. We gave them a few mechanisms to do it. We would help them see when they hadn't followed that why they couldn't find any other clothes, and they were mixed in with all their brothers and sisters' clothes. And if you just follow this technique, remember you will always have your clothes and they'll be clean, and you will know where they are. And so we gave them mechanisms, and we taught them, and when they failed at it, we helped continue to get laundry done, but it was something we could hand over to them. And so when our children are grown, by the time they get there, they're managing their laundry by themselves, and they know how to do it. Maybe well, maybe not, but they can do that. And so handing over little bits of managing your own thing, managing your studies is something you're going to have to hand over by the time they graduate. You can't be holding their hand through their studies in college and planning out all their studies and checking on making sure they're doing all their work. No, by then they need to be doing it themselves. Well, you don't want to go from graduate from high school and mom is on everything I do and she's got it all organized. She tells me when to study, when to turn in things. She gets on to me when I'm behind, when I haven't gotten up on this project. If she's doing all of that, I said, Mom, Dad could do it too. There are some dads who do it. Usually it's Mom. So if you're if you're doing that to the moment they graduate so that they will graduate well from high school and have an opportunity in college, then what are they going to do in college? Well, for a lot of people, it's a shock. And a lot of people don't do well. In fact, there's a class you have to take in all Texas colleges that teaches you how to study and how to manage yourself, because for most people, it's not been something that they have had handed off in bits to them. Now, it may be that you hand off a little bit. You are in charge of this, your math, but then you find out, like we've done 6 months later, they haven't really been doing it, keeping up with it. So now we've got to reassess, and we got to take things back, and we've got to help you work through it. But always look for opportunities to hand over responsibility. Things we thought of: managing your own money, work around the house. Our goal is for our kids, when they graduate, to be able to manage themselves. Their laundry, make some food, know how to wash dishes. Not that they always do all those in our household, and some people don't do some of them at all, but they've seen other people do them, and they've seen us do them, and they've learned how to manage different tasks, even if they don't learn all of them. So managing your own work schedule. Our kids, when they start driving and working, they have to keep up with their work schedule. And if they get fired, they get fired. So we're not gonna manage it, because we can't. Some of it is, it's helpful that we are not able to manage our older children because of the number of kids. But if you don't have that many kids and you could, you need to consider whether you should. Hand things over, even if there's consequences. Even if we had one child who had a job she really wanted, and she was set up for the interview, but she was late for the interview, and so she didn't even get considered. And so that was hard, and it's been a very good thing for her, but it was something that she had to struggle with, and we had to let her struggle with to learn. Managing classes, jobs, relationships, those are things that you'll need to hand off to. I've got some other things. Let's see. This is, as Janice and I talked about this, this is more like a balance and a dance rather than a set of rules that you're going to be following. It's not like there's a procedure for handing off responsibility. It's something you feel out. It really is like dancing, and I'm not good at dancing. I don't feel things out very well. I learn the steps, and I practice them, and then I do them. This is where it's helpful to rely on someone who's a little better at that sort of thing. So my wife has been very helpful to me, but still, I've had to, with her, feel out each child, because they're each different, they're each ready at different times for different responsibilities, and then feel out how they've handled it, how things are going, and help them through whether success or failure. And each of them will need a little bit of help. So it's like a dance. Another analogy I thought was helpful for this. God is the potter and we're the clay, right? He makes us into the pot he wants to form. That's actually God. That's not us. A better way to think of yourself is not as a potter making this fine art that you're going to eventually hand off into the world. You're actually an arborist, which is a gardener for trees, if you don't know what that is. A gardener. You're an arborist. And you're helping a tree to grow. You're not making the tree into what it is, okay? So you are going to direct their growth. You're going to notice how they grow. You're going to assist them. You're going to find problems and help them work through it. But the growth is going to happen, and really the growth is from God, and it's in the direction that He's created that tree. I'm not going to take a pecan tree, and if I decide to, it's going to be an oak tree. And that's what we tend to do with our kids. We want to turn them into what we think they should be, but really they are, and some of it's directed by who we are, so we may have an idea of where it's going to go. I adopted some children, and I was surprised. Wow, that really grows differently, because there is some that comes from the parents, but even the ones that are more genetically like my wife and I, and so we recognize where they're going more, we don't know where they're going, and they're very different. And so you're that's that dance part. You're constantly reassessing, where is this growing? Where is it going? How can I assist it? How can I notice problems and direct it? But it's not a shaping and a firm shaping of what it's going to be. So hopefully those kind of pictures are helpful. How long have we been going on this? Let's see, we've got one more. Okay, let me do this one more thing in this session, and then we can move on to our Q&As. So the last thing I wanted you to think about is, as you're working through this process of handing off, transferring responsibility, helping this tree to grow, is that they need a vision for where they're going. We talked about our vision, faithfulness, but they need vision. Like, you may have the vision, the right vision, and you have where they're going, and you know all the steps to get them there, and you're going to shape them and direct them there, but a lot of your getting them there is also transferring the vision to them. They need to see what you've seen. They need to see where they're going. So my son doesn't remember maybe everything about that vision casting we gave him, but the reason it ended up the way it was is because he had caught the vision. The kissing thing. We never told our kids they can't kiss when they're dating. we said that's not a rule in the Bible. It's not this strict thing. We really appreciated that, and it really was a blessing for us. We really enjoyed it. We sort of explained why we did what we did, but we even told them, when you start dating, you're really going to have to feel out where this other person is and what they want and expect, because you need to have some rules. And we told them, there's certain things you shouldn't do until you're married. But I don't think kissing is one of them. And if the other person, like Aiden, if your wife, your future wife, really doesn't see that as being the way a relationship would go, and she can't imagine moving forward in a relationship and really seeing that we're going to get married, and kissing needs to, at some point, be part of that transition. If she sees that, if that's where she is, you need to really work with her on that. And so either you come to an agreement, this is what you want to do, or maybe you just change a little bit about what you want to do. There's some give and take there. So we laid that out for him, but he caught the vision of what we had enjoyed and why we had liked it. And so he shared it with his wife, and she liked the idea, and so that's what they did. They didn't have to, they chose to. But there's other things about the way they did what they did, and is because they had caught the vision we had been sharing for a while. We talked with them early about, when you start noticing girls, talk to us about it. We talked about what a husband should be. We talked about, when in dating, we talked about in our family, dating really needs to have as its end marriage. That's the purpose of it. You're not just dating for dating's sake. So really you need to consider, when you're dating, do you see when you could get married? It's not like I'm dating now, but there's no way I'm getting married for 8 or 10 years because I've got school and I'm not going to be able to make any money and I can't support a family. And well, you need to think about that and not start pursuing something you can't pursue when you're not ready. So when he was thinking about this, and when he started thinking, maybe I am starting to walk into that position, then that was, he had caught the vision, right? So you need to be handing a vision. So you want your kids to walk in faithfulness and you're going to church every week. Don't just go to church every week. Talk about why you do it. Don't just have family worship every week, every day. Talk about why you gather as a family. When you have to make these calls, like we have done, we've not done sports with our kids. And there's a number of reasons. We can talk about those later. But a big one also is because most of the activities that we have thought about doing and would have been wanting to do had requirements to do stuff on Sunday. And it was, and we would back up and say, but what's our vision? Faithfulness. Faithfulness means honoring the Lord. It means going to church, being a part of the body of Christ, honoring the Lord's Day. This was part of our vision. And so we don't want to get distracted. So things that would require taking away from what we knew was the ultimate goal of our vision, then we said, even though we want to do those and everybody else does those, we're just not going to do them. But when you make those decisions, talk to your kids about why. Don't just, no, we're not doing that as a family, or even no, because that's on Sunday, or something like, let's talk about it. Why do we do that? Let's talk about what God has led us to, what his word says, why we value the church. And so hand them a vision and then give them godly examples yourself, others, being around other believers in the church is, again, another place for that. So I talked about a vision for faithfulness and talked about you're going to have to hand over responsibility. And the last thought in that handover, you're casting a vision for them, is to think about what relationship do I want with my children when they're grown? Because just like the handover responsibility, this is related. I have a place I'm going. I want a relationship where I'm no longer the commander but a counselor. And that my kids and our kids do this. Like our 3 grown children, they come to us with their decisions. Not because we're going to make a decision for them, and often we won't, but because they value our advice and we help them think through what they're doing. So, but you have to have that in mind. That's where you're going as you walk along this path. Transition from command to counsel. And so you are transferring and moving, and they're growing, and there's a goal in mind in terms of your relationship and their own independence that you want to be shooting for, even from early on. So let's go ahead and close that one here. And do you want to go ahead and do we have time for a Q&A, a little bit of Q&A here? Nope. Okay.
We'll do it in just a little bit.
Okay, we'll do it in a little bit. Okay.
We're going to start back up at 11:10, and we will kind of just combine the 2 Q&As
Okay.
At that
Perfect.
So we'll do one more teaching, a shorter teaching, and then we'll have a Q&A.